Hello everybody, Maven here, and the Prophecy Dungeon is finally here this week with Rite of the 9, along with the Ultimatum difficulty, new adepts, and 4 new god rolls in total to chase after, being the Judgment Hand Cannon, the Prosecutor Auto Rifle, the Sudden Death Shotgun, and the Relentless Pulse Rifle. But what are the god rolls for all these new weapons? Well, today we'll be going over all of them, so let's break it down. Hope you enjoy. Shout out to our sponsor, Advanced GG, the #1 gaming supplement in the world. Use code MAVEN at checkout for 10% off. Link down below. Thank you. Alright, so I'll be sure to timestamp everything down below in case you wanted to skip around, but we'll be kicking things off here with the Prosecutor Auto Rifle. In the left column gets Eddy Current, Dragonfly, Subsistence, Keep Away, Attrition Orbs, and Zen Moment, and in the right column it gets Rolling Storm, Onslaught, Paracausal Affinity, Tap the Trigger, Target Lock, and Volt Shot. Now let's start with PvE. So Auto Rifle DPS is not absolutely atrocious, but it's bad enough to where I would never consider using them without damage perks, ad clear perks, or perks that give you guaranteed value. It does get Attrition Orbs, which is guaranteed value, but unfortunately it has nothing to synergize with that outside of Target Lock. And that role has no ad clear potential, only picking off single targets. This weapon does get Subsistence, which I always rank as an S tier perk on primaries, but it doesn't have much to synergize with that outside of Onslaught, which is a very mid perk in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, it's a fun roll, but unfortunately the Breakneck already gets this roll, but it's just better because it's kinetic, so it'll do 10% more damage. Since this is an arc weapon, you're going to want to take advantage of that and utilize arc perks to make it stand out from doing things that kinetic weapons can't already do. Therefore, the god roll on the old version of the Prosecutor was Dragonfly Volt Shot, and the god roll on this new Prosecutor is still Dragonfly Volt Shot. I can also see a world in which you go with Eddy Current to have that reload speed synergy with Volt Shot, but it's up to you. Would you rather have the faster reloads or double down on those explosions? Because if you keep reloading after every kill, you're going to chain Volt Shot forever until something is too fat to kill with the primary. And if you get crit kills, Dragonfly will proc and make an explosion while the jolt from Volt Shot goes off. Therefore, crits will be extra devastating. But it being a 450 auto doesn't make this the most appealing thing in the world, TBH. This roll won't have any damage perks, so it's just gonna feel too weak. Plus, the Nation of Beasts can get the same roll, and it's just better because it's a hand cannon, which is a much better weapon type. Personally, I wouldn't chase a PvE roll of this weapon if you are someone who does a lot of endgame content, but if you are a newer player who farms a lot of chill content, then maybe this is something you could have some fun with. But all around, the Versus Pyroelectric Propellant from Vesper's Host is just a far superior arc auto rifle, and if you're trying to be serious, I would just go chase after that one instead. But when it comes to PvP, it gets a little more interesting. 450 auto rifles are extremely good in the Crucible, and I feel they're currently being heavily slept on. There was a time a couple years ago in the Amit AR2 meta where they were broken and everyone was using them. Shortly after that, they took a big nerf, but recently they received a small buff again, and in my opinion, they are quite good and very underused. They are one of the easiest and most forgiving weapon types to use in the Crucible, and this weapon gets some very solid PvP rolls. In the left column, Keep Away is one of the best PvP perks of all time, granting you 10 free range, 30 reload speed, and -5% accuracy cone growth. Easy S tier perk in the Crucible. And in the right column, you got a couple options. You got Paracausal Affinity, which is a very easy perk to proc and keep up. Upon scoring a kill with this weapon or an Arc, Solar, or Void ability, you get a 20% damage buff for 7 seconds, which is a very generous timer to transition from kill to kill and keep chaining. And this buff will bring your TTK down from a 0.8 to a 0.67, which is the same TTK you would get with something like Kill Clip. And it also allows you to 10 tap to the body at a 1.2, which for an auto rifle is very good. And the fact that you don't have to reload to proc the perk like Kill Clip does, and the fact that it has a greater timer than Kill Clip, makes it a very good perk. But at the same time, you have another S tier perk in the right column, which is Target Lock. This perk ramps up your damage on sustained damage, so it essentially just grants the weapon a bit of free forgiveness, as if 450 autos weren't forgiving already. And this allows you to achieve your optimal TTK of 0.8 in 6 crits in one body instead of 7 crits, and allows it to shave one whole shot away from your body shot TTK. So Keep Away plus Target Lock is like the ultimate consistency roll, whereas Keep Away plus Paracausal Affinity is like the ultimate kill chaining roll. Pair this along with the Crossing Over Origin trait to give it some free range, handling, and damage potentially, just intrinsically, and this thing very well could be the greatest 450 PvP auto rifle there ever was. So if you are a PvP player, I would 100% grind for this thing if I were you. But now let's move on to the sudden death aggressive frame arc shotgun. In the left column it gets 1-2 punch, threat detector, discord, envious assassin, slide shot, repulsor brace, and in the right column it gets closing time, paracausal affinity, destabilizing rounds, redirection, opening shot, and trench barrel. So when it comes to PvE, there's one role and one role only that we need to talk about, and I'm sure you already know what that is. 1-2 punch and trench barrel. This is the first shotgun ever to get these perks in separate columns. And these are pretty build around perks, I would say. When you run a perk like these, your build kind of revolves around it. But now we no longer have to make a choice and we can have both together. However, there's one big problem with that, and that's how slow this shotty will be if you run these two perks together. First of all, it's an aggressive frame shotty, which is the slowest frame but also has the smallest mag size, and it takes extremely long to manually reload a shotgun one pellet at a time. And this is why perks like Grave Robber or Auto-Loading Holster are S tier for shotguns, because they basically make it so you never have to manually reload, and that alone is what makes them viable. And when you don't have those, it's just going to be far too slow. So there's only really two main ways that you can bypass this flaw. One, use Marksman Dodge on Hunter. And this isn't really a solution if you think about it, it's more of a hindrance because you'd rather have Gambler's Dodge to synergize with whatever melee build you're using to abuse 1-2 punch and trench barrel. And the second solution is running Thread of Ascent with Grapple on a strand build. And this is probably going to be the only way in the entire game to utilize this shotgun roll because it has the best synergy. You can shotty something and then follow up with a super strong grapple powered up by 1-2 punch and then proceed to have 3 shots of trench barrel loaded. But then you're not even going to utilize all 3 shots of trench barrel because you're just going to keep going for those melees into punches on your Strand Titan build. So despite this being a very unique shotty roll, it barely synergizes. I just feel like this is one of those rolls that looks way better on paper than it actually is. Now, when it comes to PvP, don't bother. Ag frames haven't really been meta since Sparebenders. Precision frames like Scavenger's Fate are just better, and slugs have been popping off lately too. And if you really wanted an aggressive frame, the Time Lost Found Verdict from Vault of Glass is just better. So personally, I won't be grinding for this weapon, and I wouldn't recommend you grind for it either. Moving on to our next weapon, the Relentless 340 RPM High Impact Strand Pulse Rifle. In the left column, it gets Keep Away, Tear, Rapid Hit, Slice, Lone Wolf, and Firefly. And in the right column, it gets Desperado, Elemental Honing, Hatchling, Head Seeker, Closing Time, and Paracausal Affinity. Now, when it comes to PvE, I would not recommend this weapon. First of all, pulse rifles are unfortunately one of the weakest primary weapon types in the game. And that's sad because they're awesome and fun. There's a lot of cool pulses with cool rolls, but they're just not viable outside of easy content and or stunning champions. And when it comes to champion stunning purposes, you're gonna want perks that give you guaranteed damage and guaranteed value, such as things like kinetic tremors and rewind rounds, which this pulse does not have. Everything it does have is kill based. Therefore, the only place this pulse would be viable is in easier content. And it does get some interesting rolls for easy content, such as Firefly with Elemental Honing. The interesting thing about this roll is that Firefly will deal solar damage, contributing to an extra stack towards Elemental Honing. And then the weapon itself is Strand, so that's another stack right there. So that ain't the worst thing in the world, although I would still say Paracausal Affinity is the more consistent damage buff here, and I'd go with that instead. But if your goal is to hit crits for Firefly, I would actually go with Hatchling in the right column to double down on that synergy. So your crit kills will make a big explosion, boost your reload speed, and create a threadling. So if you're a pulse lover, this is honestly a pretty fun roll, and I would consider picking it up if I were you. But now we come to PvP, and this is the confusing part because this weapon could either be very good or very bad. First of all, 340 RPM high impact pulses haven't been meta for some time now after the nerf. Redrix's S-Stock is still king. That archetype is nutty and just so much better at the moment. But if the sandbox shifts again someday and 340s end up back on top, then you might want to consider this thing. Although it does have stats that fail in comparison to things like Messenger and Elsie's rifle, it does have access to a perk that those don't, which is Slice. Slice severs targets after using a class ability which lowers their damage output by 15% in PvP. which could really screw with their optimal TTKs and make gunfights more in your favor. And to pair along with that, you can go with Paracausal Affinity for that kill chaining potential. Amazing damage perk, as we talked about earlier on the Prosecutor, but you can also go with Head Seeker if you prefer consistency. But at the end of the day, the stats on this weapon will just be atrocious compared to the other top options, and if I wanted a slice pulse, I would just stick with my favorite, the Aisha's Care. So whether it be for PvE or PvP, this pulse rifle is niche and would really only appeal to a certain kind of player. And if that certain kind of player is you, by all means grind for this thing, but personally it won't be on my to-do list. And now we come to our final weapon of the day, the Judgment 140 RPM Adaptive Stasis Hand Cannon. In the left column, we got Demolitionist, Keep Away, Lone Wolf, Headstone, Rapid Hit, and Slide Shot. And in the right column, we got Adrenaline Junkie, Paracausal Affinity, Rhyme Stealer, Opening Shot, Time Payload, and Precision Instrument. Now, this may be a hot take, but I don't think it is a hot take. I think it's just a fact. 140 RPM hand cannons in PvE need an explosive perk to be viable, aka Explosive Payload, or in this case, Timed Payload. These are just god tier perks that make or break 140 hand cannons. They just grant you free damage, straight up, 15% more damage to the body and 10% more to the crit. And they also provide great flinch and greater ad clear because of that explosive AoE. There's like no downside to hip firing. You can just spray it around their feet from the air and it will hit them, so it's way more forgiving to land shots. And the biggest benefit of all is that pseudo infinite range. Because of that explosive, half of your damage has zero range fall off, so you can just clear ads from across the map. Hand cannons with explosive perks are just vastly superior to those without, and the Judgment gets that, but the problem is that other hand cannons with these perks just have better pairings. Like, they can pair explosive perks along with damage perks or ad clear perks. This one doesn't have that, but you might be like, Maven, isn't Headstone an ad clear perk? Yes, but that has horrible synergy with Time Payload, because explosive perks essentially split your shot's damage in half and allocates half of your bullet damage to explosive damage. And if that explosive damage picks up the kill, despite it being a crit shot initially, that explosive damage doesn't count as a crit, therefore will not proc Headstone. Not only that, but when the Headstone crystal is created, ideally you would hope that the delayed time payload explosion would immediately detonate that crystal you created, but unfortunately it doesn't work like that. I wish it did, because that would be awesome. So your best bet is going to be Demolitionist, so you can try to bypass the need to manually reload by spamming nades. But why would you run this in the kinetic slot when you can just run something like the Time Lost Fatebringer in the same slot, which gets vastly superior rolls with vastly superior base stats and a vastly superior origin trait? There's just no reason to go for this hand cannon instead. And I see a lot of newer players who seem to think Headstone Rhyme Stealer is a good roll on a lot of stasis weapons, but sadly Rhyme Stealer is just not good. If you're utilizing your optimized stasis builds to the fullest, you're likely to have max stacks of frost armor at all times anyway, so Rhyme Stealer is just a wasted slot. And utilizing this perk on its own, only gaining one stack of frost armor at a time, is basically next to nothing in terms of DR. You pretty much want all stacks or no stacks, there's really no in between, so I just don't really think this hand cannon is worth it. But when it comes to PvE, it has the same problem that I just mentioned about it earlier, about having inferior base stats compared to other adaptive hand cannons, despite the fact that Bungie actually buffed this thing's stats recently. The only redeeming quality is that it can get the fabled slide shot precision instrument roll, and if you manage to get the 5 out of 5 god roll, you can actually get some ridiculous base stats with this combination. You can get some okay handling with some very solid stability, as well as 100 range. And then precision instrument can virtually boost you beyond the bounds of 100 range in PvP by simply increasing your crit damage on sustained shots. So this thing can potentially be the best in slot adaptive hand cannon of all time, except it pretty much needs to be an exact 5 out of 5 god roll with all the right parts. So it's gonna be an absolute pain to grind for. And this roll is really only targeted towards top 1% Crucible players who are gods with hand cannons. So this roll doesn't even pertain to most players. And if you don't fit that criteria, then it's probably best if you avoid this hand cannon altogether for both PvE and PvP. And that's gonna do it for our Prophecy God rolls for the day. Is there anything worth grinding for in Rite of the Nine Prophecy? I would say for me personally, I will be going for that PvP Prosecutor, and that's just about the only thing I really care about here. I don't think I'll be going for anything else. I just think there are better options in the game. I'm just hoping next season that they refresh the loot for Rite of the Nine so Prophecy can drop things like Swift Verdict, Dark as Before, Adjudicator, and Long Walk. Maybe Spire of the Watcher can drop the 7th Seraph weapons like it used to, except updated with new roles. And I'm not sure about Ghosts of the Deep, but I'm sure they can come up with something. Anyways, that's gonna do it for the video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it has helped. If it did, then maybe you can help me out in return by simply hitting that like button. It really goes a long way. And if you are new here, please consider subscribing. Would love to have you here for more content on the way. And remember to check out our sponsor, Advanced GG. Use code MAVEN at checkout for 10% off your order. Link down below, and I will catch you in the next video. See you later, and good luck on the grind.